Hi, this is Liqian Ren, Director of Modern Alpha Wisdom Tree ETFs. Welcome to China of Tomorrow podcast series, where we navigate China, India, Japan, and the broader emerging markets with members of Wisdom Tree and other industry leaders. Hi, today is March 31st, 2025. It's amazing. The first quarter has already ended. And I think for people who are paying attention to market, the US market is going through quite a lot of volatility with so many policy uncertainties in terms of tariff. I think the top one, obviously for China, it's at the forefront of US tariff policy. But I think many people, a surprise was that US was also putting a lot of tariffs on other countries, not just China. So in that sense, China, relative to other countries, compared to expectation, is actually slightly better, right? Because if you just put tariffs on China, then China has to face it alone. But if it's putting tariffs on a lot of other countries and a little bit more on China, so relatively China is slightly better in this sense. Obviously, China is still going to be the main competitor of the US. So the risk of actual policies on China, whether it's tariff or tax, I think these are the two really main issues for the next 2 or 3 years. Or I kind of mentioned the three T's, that Taiwan and tax and tariffs. So I think this will continue. The volatility in the US is also going to spill over into volatility in China market. But it's going to spill over into pretty much every market. So I think now it's important to keep eyes on a few things. One is when you invest outside China, outside the US, you might want to think about currency hedging. And I understand that the dollar has strengthened a little bit in the beginning of the year and then now weakened. And I think right now it's not clear whether tariff is a strong dollar or weak dollar bad. Because for macro, you can argue both ways, that tariff, other countries generally will devalue their currency. But on the other hand, when you have a lot of volatility in the US market, then people will be considering a little bit of outside US equity investment. Then that's good for other currencies. So I think we try not to do macro betting on currencies. We have a bottom-up currency strategy for our multi-factor strategies, both for developed market and for emerging market, which is based on the currency's momentum and volatility and carry, and making sure investors are slightly can help investors a lower risk in their foreign investment. And I think we were lucky that turns out to be the case. So I think overall, when you're investing outside US, you have to not just pay attention to equity, and also you have to pay attention how you position your currency. In China right now, potentially could use a little bit depreciation, but I don't think it's going to use it significantly, because currency stability was always kind of a goal, and for China, stability on everything, even prefers the equity market, lower volatility the better, even though China equity is a high volatility strategy now, at least from the US, and it's mostly driven by sentiment, in the sense that the fundamentals of China has not really changed that much, but people's perception or people's sentiment on China has swung widely. So I think in terms of macro, China is still facing some headwinds on the housing market, housing bubble burst, and facing struggle how to upgrade its supply chain in light of the US-China competition. Also struggles again in terms of upgrading its tech. On the other hand, China's tech has made pretty significant progress, and we mentioned this. I think many US investors were not very convinced, but I think DeepSeek and some of the progresses China is making in electric vehicle and battery. And another two things that I think people, if you're really interested in understanding China tech, is in low altitude flying. That China is also making quite some progress in robotics and also in biology, in new drug development. Obviously, US still leads significantly. That also mentioned sometimes I've tried to spend not as much time on social media, mainly because we have significant time demands on our multi-factor strategies and on our currency strategies. But sometimes when I look at social media, there is a lot of talk about 21st century, about China century. I think that framework is not the right way to think about it. I mean, US is still dominant, and US medium in the US, I'm still confident in the US. In US is tackling a lot of the social and also economic issues. I think, on the other hand, as an ordinary citizen, you do your part by taking care of kids and taking care of work. I think a lot of social media discussion in some sense is not helpful, in the sense that it kind of gave these people, increases swing of sentiment on US or China equity. While in reality, I think most people view and clearly view the next 5 to 10 or 20 years as a competition between US and China. And people in the US are also working very hard to compete with China, and people in China are also working very hard. Me having able to look at the views from both sides, and I think that generally is true. So I think being US, it's good to be confident on US technology and the US economy. On the other hand, I think many Chinese are also confident because China has also made quite some progress. And I think both sides at this point, there's really no need to become very pessimistic on either country. In terms of equity, I think it's also similar. US volatility is currently driving the global volatility, and that just shows, US impact is huge. Whether if US economy is not doing well, the rest of the world economy, including China's economy, will face negative headwinds. So I think these baselines can help us think about equity investment over the long run. So again, there's some other news, like for example, China injected some capital into some of the banks. I think the better way to look at those news is that indeed there are a lot of so-called not necessarily doing well banks, and they need capital. The government is stepping in to shore up some of the banks. So it is not really just completely not injecting money, and some of it will help the downstream getting some capital into the banking system, even though it's not the most efficient way for China to deploy capital. But again, every country setup is different. For China, that's probably the easiest way for the government to inject the capital. There are also a lot of news, political news on, if you pay attention, in Hong Kong, there's CK Hutchinson is in a deal with BlackRock, try to sell some of the ports. I think a lot of this news is really so beyond ordinary person like me. I don't think it's above my pay grade to be able to have a quick comment, because really there are so much going on, I'm sure, between whether in China and also in the US, in terms of the control of future shipping. So I think a lot of those generally will be negative on equity, because US and China is engaging in a lot of behind the scene, you can call it competition, you can call it maneuvering. So I think overall, when sentiment is too negative, generally it pays to be a little bit more positive. I think ultimately the competition as long as it does not lead to war, could be good for US and for China, because it will spur technology investment in both countries. So anyway, we'll see how President Trump deal with a lot of these uncertainties. I think overall, I am still confident that that ultimately we will settle on a generally, I think, a workable solution, because for the US, it's one of the biggest consumers. Having tariffs generally will hurt US consumers. On the other hand, tariff is a good tool for the US to have, because the US is the biggest buyer of the world. So where it sits, ultimately, it's a back and forth in terms of how much people are tolerating the inflation, the increased inflation impact. One thing probably useful to look at it in Europe. As you can see, the tariff has not increased the European inflation as much, and Europe's a little bit struggling with its economy, and I think it's more likely to cut the rate faster than the US. And in that sense, that should help the dollar, because US cutting rate, it makes the interest rate differential widen again. That generally is good for the dollar. So again, I think there are a huge number of narratives, macro narratives. We don't engage in macro trading. Ours is much more systematic strategy, bottom-up strategy. But sometimes a lot of those are really noise. As an ordinary person, you really cannot take advantage of those, and also is not in a position to take advantage of those very frequent macro trading. So I think ultimately decide how much risk you can take, and then be willing to stick with equity generally pays off over a very long run. So I think that for China, that in some way is also true, that when the market is very negative on China, it is a time to be looking in China. When the market is too positive on China, probably it's time to be vigilant of all the risk on China. So thank you. That's our week, and we continue to bring. We continue to look forward to your feedback, whether it's on social media, in LinkedIn, or Twitter, and we're very happy to talk about the topics that you are interested in. Thanks.